The slave ship drifted through the endless void, a giant shadow among the stars. Its metal walls were cold, its corridors filled with the cries of the broken. Inside one of the cages sat a young alien woman, her hands bound by heavy cuffs, her eyes wide with fear. She was not the only one. Dozens of captives huddled together, their spirits crushed under the weight of hopelessness. The air smelled of oil and rust, mixed with the bitter scent of despair. She pulled her knees close to her chest, trying to feel smaller, trying not to be noticed. The guards, tall and armored, passed by with cruel eyes, their weapons humming with deadly energy. One wrong look, one wrong sound, and punishment would follow. She had seen it happen, a captive begging for water, beaten until he could no longer move. Fear was the only language that ruled here. Her mind wandered to her homeworld, a place once bright with skies of silver blue. Now she saw only flames. She remembered the day the warships came, dark and endless, blotting out the sun. They had taken everything, her family, her freedom, even her name. Here she was only a number, a mark burned into her skin by alien fire. She wanted to cry, but even tears were dangerous. The guards laughed when captives cried. So she held the storm inside her heart. But whispers traveled in the darkness. Rumors passed from captive to captive. They spoke of a prisoner unlike the rest, someone who did not bend, someone who did not break. The alien woman did not believe it at first. No one could survive defiance in this place. Yet curiosity gnawed at her, pulling her gaze across the cage. There, chained at the far end, sat the human. He was different from them, his body scarred but his spirit unshaken. The guards struck him often, yet he stood up again, blood on his face but fire in his eyes. He never begged, never surrendered, and when the guards cursed him, he only stared back with silent defiance. The woman felt a strange shiver inside. She did not understand it. Was it fear or something else? How could anyone stand tall under such cruelty? The human caught her watching, his eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, she froze, expecting anger, expecting mockery. But instead she saw something she had not seen in years. Hope, not for himself alone, but for everyone, a flame burning against the darkness. Her breath caught in her chest. She quickly looked away, yet the image of his gaze stayed with her. She wondered, why did he not break like the others? What gave him such strength? Days blurred together on the ship, pain and hunger all mixed into one endless nightmare. The guards grew crueler, their patience thin as the battles outside raged on. The alien woman listened to the distant rumble of explosions. Somewhere out there, fleets fought for control of the stars. But in here, the captives were nothing but forgotten shadows. Still, whenever her heart began to sink, she thought of the human. One night, when the guards were gone, she dared to whisper, "Why do you not fear them?" Her voice was weak, broken, but filled with desperate curiosity. The human turned slowly, his voice calm but strong. "Because fear is what they want, and I will not give it to them." His words struck her like lightning, sharp and impossible to ignore. She did not understand. How could one resist fear when pain was certain? But something inside her shifted, as if a locked door had cracked open. The other captives listened too, silent but hungry for the fire in his words. The woman felt it, something she had not felt in so long. It was dangerous, it was fragile, but it was real. It was hope. Still, hope was a dangerous thing. The guards noticed whispers spreading, and they punished harder. Every cry echoed through the cage. Every scream tore at her heart. The human suffered most, beaten again and again. But he did not stop. His eyes still burned like fire. The woman trembled, torn between fear and something greater. She feared the worst, yet deep inside, she began to wonder. Maybe chains could break. Maybe destiny could be defied. The ship moved forward into the endless dark. But within the cages, something had begun to change. A spark had been lit, a spark that even the cold walls could not smother. And the young alien woman, once drowning in despair, now felt that spark inside her chest. It was small, fragile, almost invisible, but it was enough to make her lift her head and look at the human again. And in that silent moment, without a word, she realized her story was no longer just about fear. It was about the beginning of something greater. The alien woman sat in silence, the cold chains biting into her skin as the ship drifted through the endless night. Her body was weak, but her mind kept circling back to the one figure who refused to be broken. The human. He sat at the far end of the cage, his posture straight despite the bruises across his body. Every guard seemed to have a special hatred for him. Every shift ended with his blood on the floor. Yet every time he was beaten, he rose again, slower, weaker, but never defeated. His spirit was like a flame that refused to die, and the woman could not look away. She remembered the first time his eyes had met hers, that strange moment when hope touched her heart. Since then, she had tried not to stare, tried to bury the dangerous thought inside her. But every day, the human gave her reason to wonder, to question the hopelessness that wrapped around her life. The guards feared him, though they would never admit it. They struck him harder than the others, chained him tighter, watched him closer. But their cruelty only revealed their weakness. It was as if they knew that if his spirit spread to the rest of the captives, their control would shatter. The alien woman felt her heart beating faster whenever she thought of this. What if the human was more than just another prisoner? What if he was something else, something meant to change their fate? One cycle, when the ship's lights dimmed into the false night, she dared to whisper again. Her voice was trembling, her throat dry, but the words escaped before she could stop them. Why do you rise again, even when they break your body? The human's head turned slowly, his eyes sharp even in the darkness. For them to win, I would need to surrender, he said, his voice calm, steady. And I will never surrender. The woman's breath caught in her chest. His words were simple, but they felt like a blade cutting through her despair. For so long she had believed surrender was the only way to survive. Yet here was someone proving survival did not mean surrender. It meant resistance, even if it hurt, even if it cost everything. She wanted to argue, to tell him that resistance would bring only more pain. But she could not, because deep inside, a part of her wanted to believe him. The other captives listened too, their tired eyes turning toward the human. Whispers spread like sparks, soft but dangerous. The guards did not notice at first, but soon the air itself seemed to shift. Fear was still there, heavy and suffocating, but now it shared space with something else, something the guards could not control. Hope. The woman lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the cage. Her body trembled, but it was not only fear anymore. She thought of her family, of her home world, of the life that had been stolen. For the first time, she wondered if it could be taken back. Not the same as before, perhaps, but something new, something free. The next day, the guards dragged the human out again. They beat him before the captives, their laughter sharp, their cruelty endless. They wanted to show what happened when defiance refused to die. The woman closed her eyes, unable to watch, but she could still hear it. The sound of fists, the sound of chains, the sound of pain. When they threw him back into the cage, broken and bleeding, she expected him to collapse. Instead, he lifted his head slowly, his gaze steady, and whispered, "They cannot break what refuses to bow." The woman felt her throat tighten, her eyes burn. Something inside her shifted again, stronger than before. She crawled closer, her chains clinking softly against the floor. For the first time, she dared to speak without fear. "You are not like us," she whispered. "Why fight when you know you cannot win?" The human looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet fire. "Because if I do not fight, then I have already lost." The words echoed inside her chest, refusing to fade. In that moment, she understood that the human was not fighting only for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had lost their courage. He was fighting to remind them that chains were not stronger than will. The woman lowered her gaze, her heart pounding in confusion. She feared the guards, she feared the pain, but she feared something else even more. She feared the human was right. And if he was right, then she had been living in a lie all this time. Maybe surrender was not survival. Maybe it was death in slow motion. Her world tilted. The cage no longer felt the same. The silence no longer felt complete. She could not explain it, but she knew one thing. Her life had just changed. Far away, outside the ship, the war raged on, explosions shook the hull. But inside, in the heart of the cage, another battle had begun. Not with weapons, not with armies, but with courage and fear clashing in the hearts of the captives. The human was winning that battle, one whisper at a time, and the alien woman felt herself caught in the storm, unable to turn away. That night, as the false stars of the ship's ceiling flickered weakly above her, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Maybe he is right." Her voice was barely audible, yet it carried a weight greater than chains. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in something more, and though fear still gripped her, hope began to rise beside it, fragile but unstoppable. The days passed slowly inside the prison ship, each moment heavy with silence and fear. But something had changed, something subtle yet powerful. The alien woman felt it, and so did the other captives. It was in the way they looked at one another, no longer with empty eyes, but with small sparks of something new. And at the center of it all was the human. He had become more than just a prisoner. Even when his body bled, even when his voice was hoarse from shouting against cruelty, his spirit refused to fall. The others whispered about him when the guards were gone. They whispered that maybe chains could not hold him, maybe his fire was stronger than steel. The woman listened to these whispers, and though fear still gripped her heart, she could not stop herself from believing a little. She began to watch him more closely. When the guards dragged him out, when they mocked him, when they beat him, she watched the way he endured. It was not that he felt no pain. She saw the way his body trembled, the way his face tightened, but his will, his refusal to break. That was what struck her most. Every time he rose again, it was as if he was telling the universe, "You cannot take my spirit." One night, when the ship hummed with the distant noise of battle outside, the woman dared to speak to him again. Her voice was softer than before, almost uncertain. "What if you are wrong?" she whispered, her chains rattling as she shifted closer. "What if they crush you in the end? What if all your strength means nothing?" The human's eyes turned toward her, his gaze steady and burning. "Then at least I die free," he said, his voice calm. "Better to fall standing than live crawling." The woman's heart pounded. She could not look away. She thought of her homeworld, her people, her family who had been taken. She remembered how quickly they had been crushed, how easily hope had been torn away. For so long she had accepted that surrender was survival. But now she was no longer certain. The whispers spread further, growing bolder. The captives shared secret looks, their chains clinking as they leaned close to one another. They whispered of escape, of rebellion, of breaking free. It was madness, it was dangerous, but the idea itself made their hearts beat faster. The guards noticed the change, though they did not understand it first. They felt the shift in the air, the quiet rebellion stirring in silence. The woman felt it most when the human spoke directly to her. "You are stronger than you think," he told her one night, his voice low. "They want you to believe you are weak, but that is their lie, not the truth." She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "I am not strong. I am afraid." The human leaned closer, his chains creaking. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite fear. Those words cut deep, carving through the walls she had built around her soul. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she was not just a victim. Maybe she could be something more. But hope was dangerous, and danger always came swiftly. The guards grew restless, their punishments harsher, their eyes sharper. They sensed rebellion even before it took form. One day, when whispers grew too loud, they stormed into the cages, dragging captives out and beating them without mercy. The woman watched, her heart breaking, her fear rising. She thought of the human, wondering if this would finally break him. But when the guards turned their rage on him, the human rose to his feet despite the blood and pain. His voice carried through the cages, loud and unshaken. "You cannot kill freedom, even if you kill me." The guards struck him, but his words echoed through the captives like thunder. The woman felt her chains vibrate, as if her very soul had been shaken. That night, when silence returned, the woman leaned close to him, her voice trembling but firm. "You make them afraid," she whispered. The human gave a faint, tired smile. "Good, let them fear, because fear means they know their power is not forever." The woman closed her eyes, her heart racing. She had lived in fear all her life, but now she saw something new. The guards were not gods. They were not invincible. They were afraid, and if they were afraid, then perhaps they could be defeated. The whispers grew stronger, now more than just soft breaths. They became quiet promises, spoken between broken voices. The captives promised one another that if the chance came, they would rise. They would no longer bow, no longer crawl. The woman listened, and for the first time, she whispered the same. Her fear did not vanish, but beside it grew courage, fragile but real. And as the ship shuddered with the distant explosions of war outside, the woman realized the truth. The real battle was not only in the stars, but here, inside the cages. It was the battle between surrender and resistance, between despair and hope. And though she had once believed she was weak, she now felt the fire rising within her. The fire that came from the human's defiance, the fire that whispered rebellion. She did not know what the future would bring. But one thing was certain. The chains that bound her were no longer the only truth. There was something greater waiting, something dangerous, something powerful. And when the moment came, she would have to choose fear or rebellion. The prison ship drifted silently through the darkness of space, its engines humming like a heartbeat of chains. Inside the cages, the air was thick with tension, whispers of rebellion lingering in every breath. The captives had begun to look at one another differently, no longer as strangers waiting to die, but as people clinging to a fragile spark of hope. At the center of this fragile storm was the human, and beside him, the alien woman who had once believed only in fear. She lay awake during the false night of the ship, her thoughts torn between terror and possibility. The human's words echoed in her mind. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act despite fear. But what did that mean for her? She was weak, chained, and trembling every time the guards passed. How could she be courageous when fear was all she had ever known? The next day, the guards returned with cruelty in their eyes. Rumors of rebellion had reached their ears, and they would crush it before it grew. They dragged 2 captives out, beating them before everyone, their screams tearing through the silence. The woman felt her chest tighten, tears burned her eyes, and her chains rattled as she tried not to move. She wanted to look away, but she could not. Every cry cut into her like a blade. The human stood slowly, his body weak, his face bruised, but his eyes sharp. "Enough," he said, his voice low but steady. The guards turned on him with rage, striking him again and again, yet he did not fall. The woman's heart raced, terror gripping her, but also something else. Admiration. How could he stand against them when no one else dared? That night, when silence returned, the human leaned close to her, his voice rough but strong. "They will kill us all if we do nothing," he whispered. "But if we act together, we have a chance." The woman shook her head, fear spilling from her voice. "A chance to die. A chance to live," he corrected, his gaze burning. "Death in chains is not living. It is only waiting to vanish." Her chest tightened. His words were like fire, burning away her excuses. But the thought of rising, of fighting, of facing the guards, made her body tremble. She closed her eyes, whispering, "I cannot." The human's voice softened. "You can because you are still here, because they have not broken you. Not yet." The The woman turned away, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, she wanted to rise, but courage felt like a mountain too high to climb. The days passed, and the tension inside the cages grew sharper. The captives began to plan in whispers, waiting for the right moment. The human shared his ideas, simple but dangerous. When the ship shudders from the battles outside, the guards lose focus, he explained. That will be our time. The woman listened, her heart torn between two worlds. One world told her to stay silent, stay safe, survive by obeying. The other whispered of freedom, of standing, of breaking chains. The moment came sooner than expected. Explosions rocked the ship. Alarms echoed through the corridors, the hull trembling like a beast in pain. The guards rushed about, distracted, their focus split. The human's eyes flashed. He whispered sharply, "Now." The captives hesitated, fear chaining them tighter than metal. The woman felt her chest burn, her body frozen, her heart screaming with terror. She saw the human lunge forward, chains clattering as he struck at the nearest guard. The other captives stared in shock, caught between fear and freedom. The woman's breath came fast, her mind screaming, "If you move, you will die." But another voice rose within her, the voice of his words. Courage is the choice to act despite fear. Her hands shook, her body trembled, but she moved. She surged forward, striking out with all the strength she had left, the sound of her chains ringing like a bell of defiance. The guard staggered back in surprise, his eyes wide. The other captives gasped, and something shifted in the air. Fear cracked, just a little, enough for others to follow. One by one, they rose, their voices breaking into shouts, their chains clanging like thunder. The rebellion had begun. The woman felt her fear, but it no longer controlled her. Every heartbeat screamed with terror, but also with fire. She was no longer just a prisoner waiting for death. She was part of something greater, something unstoppable. And as she fought beside the human, she realized the truth. Courage was not waiting for fear to vanish. Courage was choosing to rise, even while fear screamed inside. The choice had been made, and with that choice, destiny itself began to shift. The prison ship shook as alarms wailed through its dark corridors. Red lights flashed across the metal walls, painting every shadow with the color of blood. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. The human stood at the front, his chains clattering as he moved with fierce determination. Around him, the captives rose one by one, striking out with desperate strength. The guards, caught off guard, staggered back, their weapons humming, but their discipline broken. The alien woman felt her heart racing as she swung her chained hands like a weapon. Each strike was clumsy, wild, but filled with the fire of freedom. The guards shouted in anger, their voices sharp and cruel. They tried to crush the uprising, striking hard, but the captives did not fall back. For the first time, they were not just prisoners, they were fighters. Fear was still there, heavy in every heartbeat, but it no longer ruled them. Hope had taken its place, burning hotter than the void beyond the walls. The human fought like a storm, every movement sharp, his defiance shining through his pain. The woman stayed close to him, her eyes locked on his back, as if his fire shielded her from despair. Together they pressed forward, each step a risk, each breath a victory. Chains rattled, shouts echoed, and the cage that had been their grave became a battlefield. But the enemy was not weak. The overseers unleashed their true weapons. Energy whips cracked through the air, stunning and burning flesh. Bolts of light tore into the walls, filling the cage with the smell of smoke and scorched metal. Several captives fell screaming, their courage fading in the face of such power. The woman felt terror claw at her heart again, whispering, "This is madness. You cannot win." Then she looked at the human. He stood tall, even as his body burned with wounds, his eyes locked on the overseers. When they struck him, he did not cry out. He only glared back, his silence louder than any scream. The sight of him lit something inside her chest, pushing back the shadow of fear. Her chains rose again, her voice shouting louder than she thought possible. "For freedom," she cried, her voice breaking but fierce. Her cry spread like fire. The captives echoed it, voices rising together. The guards faltered, for the first time shaken by the unity they saw. The woman struck again, her chains slamming into the weapon of a guard, knocking it from his hand. The humans seized the chance, grabbing the weapon and turning it back against their oppressors. A bolt of energy shot across the cage, and the overseer fell, his body crumpling in shock. Silence followed for a heartbeat, the captives staring in disbelief. One guard had fallen, truly fallen. The spell of fear shattered, replaced with a roar of fury from the prisoners. They surged forward together, strength rising from unity, chains slamming, fists striking, voices shouting. The ship itself trembled as if it too felt the fire awakening within its walls. The battle spread into the corridors, the cages no longer holding their captives. Doors burst open, alarms screamed louder, and the rebellion spilled through the ship like a flood. The human led with fierce determination, his weapon flashing, his voice shouting commands. The woman followed close, her heart pounding, her fears still there, but no longer in control. Every step felt like a dream, a nightmare turned into fire. She had once believed she was nothing, but now she was fighting, and every strike proved she was more than her chains. The overseers rallied, their armored forms blocking the corridors. Their weapons blazed, filling the air with deadly light. But the captives did not stop, their fury greater than their fear. The woman ducked under a bolt of energy, her chains swinging, striking across the face of a guard. Pain shot through her arm, but she did not stop, the fire inside her stronger than the pain. The human shouted to the others, "Push forward, do not stop, freedom is ahead." His voice carried through the chaos like a beacon, drawing the captives together. The ship's walls shook with every explosion outside, the battle beyond mixing with the battle within. The void itself seemed to roar as if destiny was being rewritten in fire and blood. The woman looked around, seeing faces once empty, now alive with rage and hope. They were no longer silent shadows. They were fighters, rebels, survivors. Her heart swelled. Her fear remained. But it was no longer chains. It was fuel. Every step forward, every strike, every cry of defiance made her believe more. She thought of the words the human had spoken. Better to fall standing than live crawling. And for the first time, she understood them fully. Even if death came, even if victory slipped away, at least they had risen. At least they had chosen courage over despair. As they pressed deeper into the ship, the woman realized something more. This was no longer just about survival. It was about destiny. The human had lit the fire, but now it was spreading to all of them. The rebellion was no longer whispers. It was alive. It was fire in the void. And nothing, not chains, not weapons, not fear could silence it now. The prison ship was no longer silent. It was alive with chaos, the echo of rebellion pounding through every corridor. The alarms screamed like wounded beasts, red lights flashing across the walls. The captives who had once whispered in fear now roared in defiance, their chains turned into weapons. And at the heart of it stood the human, his fire blazing brighter than ever. The alien woman stayed close to him, her body aching, her hands bleeding from broken chains. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Every step forward felt like stepping into a new life. She remembered how she had once curled in the corner of her cage, trembling, waiting for pain. Now she stood tall, her voice joining the cries of rebellion, her chains striking against armored guards. She was no longer only a captive, she was a fighter. The overseers realized the danger, their command shattered by the sudden unity of the prisoners. They unleashed their strongest soldiers, armored giants with weapons that burned the air. The corridors shook as these monsters advanced, their eyes cold, their voices promising death. Fear rose again among the captives, some stepping back, their courage wavering. The woman felt her own heart falter, her hands trembling. Then the human raised his voice, steady and fierce. "Do not bow. Do not stop. They fear us because they know we are stronger together." His words rang out like thunder, cutting through fear. The captives surged again, voices rising, courage flooding back into their hearts. The woman shouted with them, her fear turning into fire. Together they clashed with the overseers, chains striking against armor, weapons flashing with deadly light. The battle was brutal, every step forward costing pain. The human fought with relentless strength, his body battered but unyielding. The woman fought beside him, her strikes fueled not only by survival, but by purpose. Each time she fell, she rose again, her courage refusing to die. Around them, the captives followed their lead, unity binding them stronger than steel. At last they reached the command deck. The doors were massive, sealed with heavy locks. But the human raised his weapon, and with the help of the strongest captives, they forced the doors open. Inside, the chamber glowed with alien light, filled with screens and controls. And at the center stood the warlord. He was larger than the others, his armor black and gleaming, his presence heavy with cruelty. His eyes glowed with hatred as he looked at the prisoners who dared to rise. "So, the cattle think themselves wolves," he hissed, his voice cold. "You have forgotten your place, but I will remind you." The captives froze, fear gripping them once more. The woman felt her breath catch, her body shaking, the sight of the warlord crushing the fire in her chest. But then she looked at the human. His face was bruised, blood running down his skin, but his eyes were steady, unbroken. He stepped forward, his voice strong. "You will remind no one, because your rule ends tonight." The warlord roared, his blade crackling with deadly energy. He charged, striking with power that shook the deck. The human met him head-on, their weapons clashing, sparks flying, the sound echoing through the chamber. The woman cried out, rushing to help, but the battle between them was like a storm. The warlord's strength was monstrous, his blows heavy. Yet the human's defiance refused to bend, each strike fueled by something greater than strength, purpose. The captives watched, caught between hope and despair. The woman's heart pounded, her fear threatening to break her. But then she remembered his words, "Courage is the choice to act despite fear." She tightened her grip on her broken chains and ran forward. The warlord struck the human down, slamming him to the floor, raising his blade for the final strike. In that moment, the woman screamed, her voice breaking with fury and fire. She swung her chains with all her strength, striking the warlord across the head. The blow staggered him, just enough for the human to rise again. Together they fought, side by side, each move fueling the other. The warlord roared in rage, but his strikes grew weaker as unity stood against him. Finally, with one last strike, the woman drove her chains into the warlord's chest. He fell, his armor cracking, his voice fading into silence. For a moment, the command deck was still. Then the captives erupted in cries of victory, their voices shaking the walls. The warlord was dead, and with him, the chains of fear began to break. The human stood tall, breathing hard, his eyes turning to the woman. She met his gaze, her chest rising with heavy breaths, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe. They had done it. The ship that had once been their prison now trembled under their control. The chains that had bound them were broken, not only in metal, but in spirit. And in that moment, the woman understood. Destiny was no longer in the hands of their oppressors. It was in their hands. The warlord's body lay broken on the command deck, his black armor cracked and silent. For a moment, there was only stillness, as if the ship itself could not believe what had happened. Then the silence shattered, the captives erupting into cries of victory, their voices rising like thunder through the corridors. The chains that had bound them for so long clattered to the floor, no longer symbols of despair, but trophies of defiance. The human stood tall in the center of it all, his chest heaving, his face bruised, his body broken yet unbowed. Beside him stood the alien woman, her chain stained with the final strike that ended the warlord's reign. Her heart pounded, her hands shook, but not from fear anymore, from the weight of what they had done. She looked at the human, and for the first time, she felt not only hope but certainty. They had won. The captives surged forward, freeing one another, lifting their wounded, and shouting words of freedom. The woman joined them, helping others stand, her hands steady even as her arms trembled with exhaustion. She remembered the faces of those who had fallen along the way, the cries of those who had suffered, and she knew that their victory carried the weight of every sacrifice. It was not only freedom for themselves, but justice for the lost. The ship groaned as explosions rocked the hull, the war outside still raging. But the command deck was theirs, the systems open to their control. The human moved to the main console, his eyes scanning the alien symbols until he found what he needed. With a steady hand, he redirected the ship's systems, turning its weapons not against the prisoners, but against the warlord's fleet. The woman stood beside him, watching in awe as the prison ship became a weapon of liberation. The void outside lit up with fire, beams of light tearing through enemy vessels. The fleets that had once seemed unstoppable now faltered, caught between battle and betrayal. The prisoners cheered as the ship fought back, its roar echoing across the stars. The woman felt tears in her eyes, but this time they were not of despair, they were of triumph. She had thought her life was over, that her story was nothing but chains. But here she stood, free and alive, part of something greater than she had ever imagined. As the battle raged, the human turned to her, his eyes steady. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice quiet but strong. She nodded, her heart steady now. "Then we begin together." The fighting outside faded as the enemy ships broke apart or fled, the void filled with burning wreckage. When silence returned, it was not the silence of despair, but the silence of peace. The prisoners gathered, their faces lit with exhaustion and joy. Some wept openly, some laughed for the first time in years. Others simply stood, breathing freely as if they had been reborn. The woman stepped forward, her eyes sweeping across them. She had once been afraid to even whisper, afraid to even hope. Now she raised her voice, strong and clear. "We are no longer prisoners. We are no longer slaves. Today, we rise free." The captives roared in response, their voices shaking the walls, their unity stronger than any chain. The human watched, a faint smile on his battered face. In his eyes, she saw not only pride, but something deeper, something that spoke of destiny fulfilled. As the ship drifted through the void, no longer a prison, but a symbol of freedom, the woman felt the weight of her journey. She thought of the first time she had seen him, standing unbroken despite the pain. She thought of his words, his fire, his courage, and she realized something. He had not only defied destiny, he had changed it. Her story, once marked only by fear, had become something greater. She had feared cruelty, but found courage. She had feared chains, but broken them. And now, she no longer feared her future, because it was hers to shape. The stars stretched endlessly around them, the void no longer silent, but alive with possibility. The human stood at her side, the captives gathered behind them. Together, they looked out at the galaxy, no longer as slaves, but as survivors, as warriors, as free. And in that moment, she knew the truth. Destiny was not written in chains, it was written in choice. And they had chosen freedom.